So, our reading this morning from the Gospel of Mark begins with a very telling phrase. 6 days later. 6 days later. It is somewhat of a strange way to start a passage because it emphasizes that things have already happened. Later reminds us that there was an earlier, 6 days earlier. And so, if we read back through Mark's Gospel, we can see what those events were, what happened 6 days earlier, that Mark saw as being so significant for this event that he linked them together. 6 days earlier, in Mark chapter 8, we have a key moment which begins with Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you think that I am?" And the event is important for two reasons. Firstly, there is Peter's answer, "You are the Messiah." The divinity of Jesus is apparently recognized by the disciples. And I say apparently because then there is the discussion that follows when Jesus starts to explain what lies ahead and to talk specifically and directly about the crucifixion. And this doesn't fit for Peter with his idea about what being a Messiah would entail. So Peter argues with Jesus, and then Jesus argues back, emphasizing the extent to which Peter is focusing on his human agenda instead of God's greater purpose. I think we can empathize with Peter here because it's all too easy, all too human to think we know what God should be doing. We want God to solve our problems, perhaps not as dramatic as Peter's desire for an end to Roman rule, but to fix things for us nonetheless. And too often, then we try to domesticate God to fit our plans. Doesn't really matter that experience tells us it's futile, because part of us yearns to reject that reality, to deny that the human experience is often filled with struggle and pain. And yet, that's what makes us human. Kate Bowler is a Canadian academic and author, confronting what she sees as the false promises of the self-help industry. Her office contains a series of framed anti-self-help sayings. "The universe stabbed me in the back," reads one. Another, "What doesn't kill you might try again tomorrow." And Kate has the scars to explain her frank outlook. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at the age of 35, and following her first surgery, she was given a survival rate of just 14%. In and out of hospital, she discovered that she needed to come to terms with the profound sense of human vulnerability and our inability to control much of anything about our lives. We can be people of deep hope she said in a recent interview. That is not the same thing as saying our lives are going to work out. Or as one of her book titles puts it, there is no cure for being human. Being human. 6 days earlier, Peter's humanity prevented him accepting the full extent of Jesus' divinity. So now, 6 days later, Jesus' divinity is fully revealed. And revealed in a way that could have no other explanation, leave no room for questions. You can even see Mark struggling to explain what happens, floundering in his attempts to describe how Jesus appeared. Jesus' clothes, he wrote, became dazzling bright, such as no one on earth could make them. There aren't the words. There isn't the sense to appreciate just how bright Jesus appeared. This moment defies understanding. We can't categorize or normalize or rationalize this. And rather than try, we are instead to pay attention to what is not ordinary or typical about the event, and what is not ordinary or typical about Jesus. The humanity of Jesus, his flesh and blood appearance, is now overshadowed by his immense divinity. He is dazzling and terrifying and like nothing and no one else. It is a breathtaking, mind-boggling moment. The wonder and mystery of the divine God breaking into the world. God affirming Jesus and his ministry as God himself announces, "This is my Son, the beloved." And if that description sounds familiar, it's because Mark has already related it much earlier in his gospel. It happened at the baptism of Jesus, when a voice again came from heaven, this time speaking to Jesus and saying, "You are my Son, the beloved." There are two key differences, though, between what God said at Jesus' baptism and at the Transfiguration. Firstly, at Jesus' baptism, God speaks to Jesus, "You are my Son." Whereas now he is talking to the disciples, "This is my Son." And then this identification is coupled with a command. Listen to him. 6 days earlier, Peter had identified Jesus. "You are the Messiah." But he wasn't doing a great job of understanding what that fully entailed. And so here is God to point it out. Listen to him. And if the baptism was a blessing of Jesus and the ministry he was about to embark on, the Transfiguration signifies a revealing, an epiphany even. This is God, wholly human and wholly divine. Listen to him. Listen to Jesus dazzling on the mountaintop as he reveals, in Paul's words, the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Listen to Jesus, displaying God's promise that light will shine out of the darkness, and affirming God's presence, shining in our hearts, breaking into our world, radiating as a beacon of hope. A beacon of hope which will be needed. Because as much as the Transfiguration showed the disciples the divinity of Jesus, that is not where the story ends. Instead, it ends with the humanity of Jesus once more displayed, coming down the mountain after the dazzling and shining, and God's blessing and command after a moment so extraordinary life would never be the same again. After all that, they went back down the mountain to the ordinary they had left not even 6 hours earlier. Listen to him. Listen to him when he tells you that you're going back down the mountain to rejoin the struggle of everyday reality, to journey to Jerusalem. Kate Bowler had a desperate need to rejoin her everyday reality. There she was in hospital, recovering from her surgery, wrapping her head around the limits of the 2 years she had been told were the most that she could hope for. So she is determined to spend as few of those 730 days in hospital, but has been told by her medical team that she can't go home until she can walk without falling over. And so she sets to walking, hobbling to the door of her room, swaying to the elevator, wobbling to the lobby, and then the hospital bookstore, where she is accosted by a prominent display overflowing with self-help books. It's all too much for Bowler, whose academic career focuses on the problems inherent in the specifically Christian self-help literature. As Bowler relates the event, dressed only in her hospital gown, clutching her IV pole, she demands to see the manager and announces, "I need you to know that these books are not suitable to be sold in a hospital." She gesticulates at the book, perhaps causing the most offense. It says here it was a New York Times bestseller, the manager replies, not unreasonably. Kate counters, "But he's saying, God will reward you with money and health if you have the right kind of faith." Bowler took a deep breath. "Normally, okay, I can handle this, but you can't sell this in a hospital. You can't sell this to me." Kate points to one book and then another. "This book tells me to claim my healing using Bible verses." The manager is unconvinced. "So what do you recommend instead?" Just let me take down the books that actively blame people for causing their own diseases, which the manager lets Bowler do. Weeks later, Kate leaves hospital. Against all expectations, she survived and is currently cancer-free. But it changed her. She has confronted her profound sense of human vulnerability and of her inability to control much of anything about our lives. Her words are now words for people coming down the mountain. We can be people of deep hope. That is not the same thing as saying our lives are going to work out. Kate continues, as a person of faith, I believe God is drawing us towards a future that is fundamentally a story of love and salvation of the world. That's not the same thing as saying that my life, in its particularity, in all my hopes and dreams, is going to play out the way I imagined. I would take what Bowler says one step further. It is not just that we can be people of deep hope. We are called to be people of deep hope. Because Christ walks down the mountain with us. Christ journeys to Jerusalem for us. Because God cares for us. As the pastor David Lowes writes, the awesome and unfathomable God who created and sustains the vast cosmos around us not only knows that we exist, but cares about our ups and downs, cares about our hopes and disappointments, cares about our dreams and our despair, cares about the things we care about, promising to be with us, to walk alongside us, to never, ever let us go, and in time to redeem us and bring us into the company of saints. Our God is a God of deep hope and deep love. At the end of January, I came across a meme that is perhaps a perfect fit for Transfiguration. It shows a bright, dazzling sun appearing over the horizon that displays underneath it a timeline of the winter solstice, with markers indicating 5 weeks on either side of the darkest day of the year. The image celebrates January 22nd. You made it through the 10 darkest weeks of the year. This is our Transfiguration truth, the dazzling love of God breaking into the world, bringing us hope in our darkest days. You made it through. We made it through grief, disappointment, heartache, loneliness, stress, setbacks, meltdowns. We made it through. And we made it here today. And we'll make it through the next week because we have a God that cares. Cares so much that he came down from heaven, came down from the mountain to walk with us, to suffer with us, to suffer for us. If you take away one thing from this service today, let it be these words of Kate Bowler. As a person of faith, I believe God is drawing us towards a future that is fundamentally a story of love. So as we struggle on, we are not alone. We are loved by God. We are sustained by God. We have hope in God. Deep hope. Praise be to God.